X Best Station says, speaking of Aladdin, I thought it was also interesting to mention that this is another game most people don't realize another person had a big hand in with the music creation. Donald S. Griffin is also credited as working on the game's soundtrack and has went on record saying he composed 5 original tracks for the game and he arranged all of the score from the movie. This is interesting to me because in a making of video for the game that can be found on YouTube, Tommy's the only one shown during the music segment of the video and can be seen playing the melody to Prince Ali, a song he apparently did not arrange for the game. That's a really interesting comment because in the Slopes Game Room interview with Tommy takes full credit for doing the full audio of the game. And now I think a few other people had already debunked this, and not to mention that most of the audio was from the movie just being translated into the game. But based on this comment, it seems like he didn't even do that, and that somebody else did all the legwork. So another great example of Tommy taking credit for other people's work. The next one from Maria number 94 says, this video was a hell of a trip. It's unbelievable how much stuff there was. One additional tidbit regarding EP, reviews on the run, Judgment Day, etc. is that while there were reviews where he wouldn't mention that he or his company worked on it, he'd still praise them in regards to sound. There was one 2003 episode that featured Black Dawn, a PlayStation 1 game, as that week's retro pick, with Tommy talking about it and giving special mention to the fact that it was one of the first games with dynamic soundtracks. For context, Black Dawn's audio side was handled by Tallarico's company. It once again only credits Tommy Tallarico Studios alongside Todd Dennis, who likely did a fair amount of the tracks too, and the sound design. So it's funny that he once again didn't mention that. There's also the fact that his first dynamic game soundtrack claim is kind of BS, because there was quite a few games prior to Black Dawn that did so. Example, Star Wars Dark Forces. But that's not too surprising, LOL. Incidentally, Black Dawn happens to be where a couple of his contributions to Sonic and the Black Knight originated from. One of those, Great Megalith, is at least a new arrangement done alongside none other than Jun Sanui himself, and the other one, Molten Mind, was just taken as is from Black Dawn. I guess he figured nobody was going to notice, but still. The even funnier thing is that it wasn't even the first time it happened, as one of the training mini games on Knockout Kings 2000 on Nintendo 64, coincidentally by the same devs as Black Dawn, featured one of those aforementioned tunes, albeit in a shortened form due to cart space limitations. Also, coincidentally, a lot of coincidences here, it was another game that had Ya Boy, Joey Kuris's involvement. It all ties in, LOL. And if you go online, somebody recently uploaded, I think it was Sensible Person or Goose, can't remember, a video showing that he reused his music over and over again. And wouldn't it be funny if it wasn't even something Tommy created and that Todd Dennis created, and he's just reusing other people's music in other games? That sounds like a Tommy thing to do. This is from ICICLOUI, whatever that means. About the Cribs thing, are we sure Gamer TV actually shot the footage? Because the re-upload doesn't include the Gamer TV graphics, but also isn't cropped. It seemed to be using the original footage. Why would Tallarico have original footage? Did Gamer TV send it to him? Did they upload it somewhere without post-processing? Why? Here's what I think, and this is what he thinks, the person. He shot the tour himself because he wanted a crib episode of his weird house, and then went around giving it to companies until one of them published it. My money is Cribs also owns a copy of that footage because he gave it to them. And I like this comment. This is a good one. I believe he would do this, because I also thought it was kind of weird when I saw both videos. They didn't have the same graphics on the screen. So somebody has the master copy of it, and it would make sense it was Tommy. And he has done other tour videos of his house with other people. So that's even further embarrassing that I could see him sending it around to everyone saying, hey, put this on something. That's why it ended up on a demo disc. Super funny. I also noticed that he played with this kangaroo with the New York Yankees hat on, and that was only featured in the second video. So how would the second company be able to get extra footage that the original supposed NTV Cribs video would have? So I definitely agree with this comment, saying that Tommy's the one who filmed all of this and provided the footage for everyone. So it's really sad. AJ Mortap says, Tommy Tallarico was not the only composer for Advent Rising, despite the CD for the soundtrack only saying composed by Tommy Tallarico on the front. Laurie Robinson and Emmanuel Fratiani A husband and wife composition duo and my old piano teachers also composed it. It's impossible to know what the work distribution was, but this video doesn't give me much reason to assume Tommy did most of it. I do think it would be interesting if someone were to do a deep dive on Advent Rising, because the music is a very strong point and was talked about a lot, but I only did very basic research on it, and from what I could see, there was like this person that wrote, there was like 5 or 6 different people who worked on the audio for the game, the soundtrack, and I don't remember any wacky zany tunes like Global Gladiators type stuff in the game, so I'm wondering if Tommy just did the basic sound effects or like the menu screen while all the big amazing music was done by other people. Shooter Person says, so I don't mean to underplay Joey's contributions to the many works he's been involved with, but this is something I intentionally dug back into in college a few years back. 1993 was the starting production of the animated film Cats Don't Dance, which was eventually released in 1997. While I was watching it, I noticed the Roblox oof sound at approximately an hour in. The sound effect came from a character named Pudge, an anthropomorphic penguin who was voiced by Matthew Harried. I struggled to find the credits for the individuals involved with the sound effects in the film, aside from discovering that many of the sound effects used were from house libraries. I was hoping to able to cross-reference a credit in that film with Joey's work. And a few people have said this from a few different movies and cartoons. It's very similar to many other sound effects, so it's hard to prove that this one is originated from this, but it would make sense. Like what would make sense is that the original oof in Messiah was taken from a sound library. So who knows? Gabe Morales says, the claim about being the first American ever to work on a Sonic franchise is such an insanely easy thing to disprove. LOL. Dean Sitton, a Sega of America employee, also known as literally the dude on the box art for Kid Chameleon, wrote the Sega of America Bible for Sonic the Hedgehog in early 1991, before the first game released. He's the dude who literally came up with the name Dr. Robotnik. Tommy didn't work on a Sonic game until Sonic and the Black Knight on the Wii. Like, Tommy is aware that Sonic 2 and 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Spinball and Sonic Extreme were all made in San Francisco using Americans, right? Ever heard of Mark Cerny? Dude literally hired Yuji Naka's to Sega of America for Sonic 2. Tommy Tallarico is such a piece of shit and a liar, LOL. Tommy Tallarico isn't even the first American musician to work on the franchise. Howard Drossen at SOA did the soundtrack to Sonic Spinball, and famously Spencer Nielsen did the USA soundtrack to Sonic CD, both in 1993, 16 years before Tommy did his little thing. Yeah, it's one of the weirdest ones that he always referenced. And it's like a lie if you've seen the videos of him, sometimes the lie he doesn't even like telling people, because there's interviews where he's like, oh, I worked on that Sonic game, I don't remember which one of the Wii ones or something, and he makes it like it's not, I was the first American to work on it, but he makes it like such a not big deal, and such a weird lie to use, because with obscure games it's hard to find any info on, but the game like Sonic, it's so easy to disprove. Takahashi2212 says, about Metroid Prime at Space World 2001, Miyamoto himself said he didn't like the sound effects and had them replaced, which is why the game wasn't shown there. Kind of flies in the face of what he says about Miyamoto said about his work. Also, Howard Drossen was the first American Sonic composer doing the music for Sonic Spinball, 93, a year before Sonic 3. Another funny thing, and this is CC Reisers, I've seen that name before. Another funny thing about Tommy's claim with Sonic is that he claims to be good friends with Mark Cerny, who happens to be the producer of Sonic 2. And everyone's covered the Metroid Prime thing numerous times before, and like in my previous video, Tommy gets confused that Metroid Prime was released on the Wii and not on the GameCube, and says he worked with them for 5 years, when every single thing proves that he's wrong. Like, if he worked with them for 5 years, it would be impossible, because Retro Studios wasn't even around 5 years prior to him getting fired from the project. So just an awful lie that he uses. Chilenya says, why would you be proud of a bigger venue and huge crowds for your classical orchestral performance when anyone with minimal understandings of classical music will know that the sound quality is inversely proportional to the size of the venue? An orchestra sounds great in a theater and terrible in a football stadium. A big place and a big crowd would discourage me from buying a ticket if I were interested. Which is true. Necropolis says, I've literally spent my entire adolescence and adulthood thinking Tallarico did, by himself, the OST to MDK, which is in my opinion one of the coolest collections of songs there are in a video game. It turns out someone else is in the credits, a man named Todd Dennis. And after this video, I'm not really sure I should think Tommy did anything but procure the album. So there's that. Thanks for shredding that misconception hairs. Tommy has been on the record. He doesn't like MDK. There must have been something happened. Maybe that was his last game with Shiny. Tommy kind of crapped on it. But people do, it does have a cult following, so. Okay, Miles Davini 5759 says a couple other things that didn't get mentioned in this video. Tommy's Ferrari is apparently a fake. It's just a body kit, meaning that car. I think that was his older vehicle, not the current one. So the second one, I'll skip past that one. The second one is he claims he has done music for Earthworm Jim, but he seems to have primarily worked on the sequel, not the first game, even though he's disingenuous about this. The first Earthworm Jim is actually credited to someone named Mark Miller, who apparently Tommy's main contribution was doing the synth arrangement heard on the Sega CD Windows port of the game. I remember seeing a quote somewhere where someone said Mark's the main one credited because of legal reasons, but this seems to be another Tommy Joey situation where Tommy ends up taking credits for another guy's work. Interestingly, there's even a comment in this very video's comment section from someone who says the original composer was their music class instructor and specifically pointed out they originally did that game's music. I definitely believe it. In addition to this, even though it seems likely he did in fact act as the main composer for Earthworm Jim 2, like half the tracks in that game are traditional songs rather than 100% of his own compositions. This gives me the impression he isn't very good at doing an entire game score by himself. So he'd have others pitch in, like in the Terminator for Sega CD or Earthworm Jim's 2 case, just use traditional compositions to lighten the load. I think the end product came out fine to be honest, but still tells a lot about his mentality. His third point was, I'm not so sure if he's gloated over doing the music for Aladdin for a Genesis, but he primarily worked on sound design for that game, not the soundtrack. There's a Sega 16 interview you can find where he seems to explain his main role as having just worked on translating the music from someone else's made plus the movie's tracks onto the Genesis. He even describes himself as knowing the Genesis hardware very well. Somehow, though, Spot Goes to Hollywood for Sega Genesis was released in 1995 and was solely composed by him, yet comes out sounding very amateurish, though to his credit, I think the music in that game is his best work composition-wise, so it makes me think he possibly was never too much of an expert on the Genesis. There's an unrelated SNES version of that game that had its ROM get out a couple years back where you can hear better renditions of all the songs in the Genesis version. Which makes you wonder how someone who apparently knew the Genesis sound hardware didn't know this. This is mostly nitpicking, but it always struck me as sort of, well, off. Just to go over that last comment, I do remember hearing Tommy mentioning that I think he said that he used to hand off stuff to Mark Miller to do on the Super Nintendo. Like, he didn't do the Super Nintendo stuff, that he did only the Genesis stuff. So this kind of makes sense and kind of contradicts what he says, because if the Super Nintendo renditions were better, it makes sense because he didn't do it. But he has always said that he is the Genesis guy. Who knows what the truth is? Jeebus Loves Me says, is it a bit weird that the Acro woman is wearing the same green shirt in the video as her near profile picture on the website? Makes it look like she showed up for one day of work and bag of liar cash. I think that's what they were trying to say. And I wouldn't doubt it if she only showed up for one day. So we had several people who were audio designers and who've worked in the gaming industry doing audio sound effects chime in, mostly about what Tommy said with Metroid Prime and how he designed the sound effects, and then they designed the weapons based off his sound effects, which is absolutely insane and ridiculous. So we had a lot of people who commented on that part, and we'll start off with this one. Pseudo Scorpion 14 says, as someone who actually works in AAA game dev, hearing Tommy describe the work process on the Metroid Prime is riotous. Now that is not how this works. That's not how anything works. Shay Furlong says, the reason Metroid Prime 4 is taking so long is because they're waiting for Tommy Tallarico to finish the weapon sounds before starting the rest of the game. That's hilarious. Damien M. Art says, artist who has worked in video games here. To the suggestion that an external sound guy would be the lead on the art department's work, LOL, LMAO even. Quick note about Moby Games though, even looking up my own name didn't yield all the titles I've worked on, have been credited for. Some are the same studio and only title shows up when there are multiple under the same studio. Someone use it as a great source for finding accurate credits. Yeah, Moby isn't 100%. Regular Showman. I haven't finished the video yet, but the bit about Metroid Prime gave me a brain aneurysm. It's clear to me this dude knows extremely little about Metroid because the notion that they designed the weapons around the sound effects Sound effects which would, if his story were true, have been from an outsourced company who otherwise had very little creative control of the game is insane. Metroidvanias are in a lot of ways pretty much designed around the player's kit. Because weapons have a practical use outside of combat, I'm not sure which one tends to come first in the game design. The world or the weapons, but his story means the weapons would have came first, and the idea that Retro Studios would have designed basically the entire game around. I didn't click read more, but you get the gist of it. So a lot of these comments are about Tommy's, what he had said about Metroid Prime and how he created the sounds and they then designed the weapons based around the sound, which is absolutely insane. And this one is a pretty good example of it because they talk about it's an outsourced company, so is Metroid really going to be designed by an outsourced Tommy Tallarico Studios, like the whole game and the weapons? Like, that's pure insanity and such ridiculousness that who in the world would actually believe that? Lil X says, great video as always, fella. Another point on the audio for Metroid Prime is that Tommy claims he had no images or idea of the weapons prior to making the weapons. I recently graduated from SAE Music and Tech and Sound Engineering and am currently going for a Master's in Foley Sound Effects. As someone who's worked on Foley for around 4 years now, we never make the sound effects first. There's no basis for how you're supposed to give a character to the sound in any way at all. It's another person laughing at the idea. And the fact that Tommy would say this as the premier sound world record holder and all that, I imagine the people in the game industry really laugh at this guy. Like, I almost feel sorry for him because I can only picture them all laughing and reading this stuff and laughing so hard. But let's continue on. Fluffy Critter says, I make sounds and music for indie games, and I can't imagine caring this much about elaborating so much on detailed process of creating a 0.3 second sound effect. Heck, there's sounds I recorded 3 days ago that I probably struggled to remember how I did then. Edit. Oh god, just got the bit about G.A.N.G. That whole organization was a useless scam where they basically got a lot of video game audio artists to pay stupid amounts of money to join a crappy forum that didn't even work most of the time. Also, they called their meetups gang hangs, which is just yikes. I only paid my dues once and then never bothered again. So there we go. We have someone who was part of the G.A.N.G network, and it sounds like it's just like a scam, just to get people's money. And we had another comment about that saying it's pretty much a waste of time. Ragna the Pig says, it's a small thing, but I love how the way he describes making the sounds for Metroid Prime. On top of being a ridiculous way to work, makes absolutely no sense for Metroid, a franchise that already has an established visual identity. They're not going to model your weapons after your sound effects, Tommy. They already know what Samus's power beam looks like.